Pull up a chair, folks. This one's going to be a ride. If you've ever dealt with family drama that left you speechless, you'll understand why I'm here, spilling it all on Reddit. This story is about me, a 56-year-old widow, and my sister Julia, 47. Julia's the type of person who always finds a way to get what she wants. But this time, she went too far. Let me set the scene. 3 years ago, I lost my husband Ethan. We were high school sweethearts, married for 30 years, and built a beautiful life together. He was kind, hardworking, and had a vision for our future. He started his own business, made some smart real estate investments, and left everything to me when he passed. Losing Ethan shattered me. We didn't have kids, so when he was gone, I was left with an empty house and an emptier heart. After months of mourning, I decided to channel my grief into something meaningful. Ethan and I always dreamed of turning our lakeside summer house into a wedding venue. It was our favorite spot, a serene oasis surrounded by nature. So I made it happen. The venue became my way of keeping Ethan's memory alive while helping others celebrate their love. It's grown popular in our community, and I love running it. It gives me purpose and keeps me connected to people. Even though I still spend a lot of time alone. Every year on November 3rd, the anniversary of Ethan's passing, I organize a feast for the local orphanage at the lakeside house. Ethan was a big believer in giving back, so this tradition feels like the perfect way to honor him. It's become a meaningful ritual for me, a day dedicated to his memory and helping those in need. Then there's Julia. We've never had a close sisterly bond, just a civil relationship. She's been through a lot. Her first marriage in her 20s ended badly, and she's struggled financially for years. But a few years ago she got engaged again, and I was genuinely happy for her. With both our parents gone, we're the only family each other has left. When Julia asked if she could use the lakeside house for her wedding, I didn't hesitate. I said yes, and even offered to pay for the whole thing. I thought this could be a chance for us to grow closer, to bridge the gap between us. She seemed thrilled, and I felt like I'd done the right thing. But things took a turn. For months I kept asking Julia for her wedding date so I could block off the venue. She kept stalling, saying they hadn't decided yet. Then out of nowhere, she emailed me her wedding invite. The date? November 3 RD. At first I thought it must be a mistake. Surely she'd forgotten what that day meant to me. But as I read her email, the entitlement slapped me in the face. Not only had she planned her wedding on Ethan's death anniversary, but she also didn't even confirm it with me. She'd listed my house as the venue address, as if it were a done deal. I called her immediately. I explained calmly at first that November 3rd was off limits because of the feast I host every year. I asked her to consider moving the date. There was still plenty of time, and I even offered to help with the arrangements. Julia wasn't having it. She said the date was non-negotiable because her fiancé, Greg, wanted it. Apparently, the date held special meaning for them. I tried to reason with her, but she doubled down. She accused me of being selfish and of refusing to let go of the past. Then she said something I'll never forget. He's been dead for 3 years. Why are you still stuck on him? He was useless anyway. Something inside me snapped. Ethan was everything to me, and hearing Julia disrespect his memory like that was unbearable. I told her there was no way I'd let her use the house. I wouldn't pay for the wedding either. If she wanted to insult my late husband, she could find another venue and another wallet. Julia lost it. She screamed at me, called me names, and hung up. A few days later, she reached out again, acting like nothing had happened. She asked for confirmation for the venue and the money, as if our fight had never occurred. I refused. I told her I wouldn't budge. That's when she tried to spin things, claiming she'd only said those things to help me move on. She even framed her actions as concern for me, saying I needed to start dating again and stop brooding over Ethan. Her apology felt hollow and manipulative. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her behavior than she was letting on. And I was right. Stay tuned. Things were about to escalate. After Julia's half-hearted apology, I tried to keep my distance. I needed time to process what she'd said and the audacity of it all. But just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my aunt called. Now, Aunt Maggie is the kind of person who always tries to mediate family drama, but this time, she didn't sugarcoat anything. She said she overheard Julia gossiping with her daughter during a recent visit. What she told me made my blood run cold. According to Aunt Maggie, Julia had deliberately chosen November 3rd for her wedding. It wasn't just a coincidence, and it wasn't about special memories with Greg. No, Julia wanted to hurt me. She said it outright, that she wanted to make me miserable, to remind me of my empty life without Ethan. As if that wasn't enough, she admitted to being jealous of the life I had with him, the stability, the success, the love. She even confessed to once trying to flirt with Ethan herself, though she claimed it never went anywhere. Hearing this from Aunt Maggie made my stomach churn. Julia wanted her wedding at the lakeside house, not because it was beautiful, but because it was Ethan's legacy. She thought it would be the ultimate way to twist the knife, hosting her wedding on the very day I used to honor his memory, in the very place he and I had built together. When Aunt Maggie told me all this, I felt sick. The woman I had just offered to support, my own sister, had been plotting to humiliate me. At that moment, I made a decision. This wasn't just about refusing to host her wedding anymore. This was about standing up for myself and Ethan. I couldn't let her get away with it. I spent the next few days thinking about what to do. Revenge isn't usually my style, but Julia had crossed so many lines that ignoring her behavior felt like letting her win. I decided to play her game, but on my terms. I called Julia and told her I'd reconsider. I said she could have the wedding at the lakeside house on November 3rd after all. She seemed surprised at first, then smug. She even had the nerve to tell me I'd come to my senses. But I wasn't done yet. I told her I couldn't write her a check right away because of an ongoing audit, but I promised to pay after the wedding. She was too thrilled about getting the venue back to argue. I pretended to support her plans, even offering advice on decor and logistics. She bought every word of it. Behind the scenes, I was preparing for my own little surprise. The week leading up to the wedding, Julia and Greg were busy with final arrangements. Meanwhile, I made a few calls. I hired extra security for the venue and made sure the gates were locked tight on the morning of November 3 RD. When the day arrived, chaos broke loose. The first people to show up were the wedding planner, florist, and decorators. They were greeted by locked gates and a small army of security guards. My phone started buzzing almost immediately, with Julia screaming on the other end. "You're ruining my wedding!" she shrieked. "You're a monster! You'll pay for this!" I didn't say a word. I just hung up and blocked her number. From the attic of the house, I watched the scene unfold. Cars arrived one after another, full of confused and frustrated guests. Julia and Greg showed up not long after, looking panicked. They tried to talk their way past security, but the guards stood firm. Some guests even tried to climb over the fence, but they were quickly escorted back to their cars. Julia was absolutely humiliated. Eventually, the entire crowd dispersed, realizing there wasn't going to be a wedding at the lakeside house that day. Julia and Greg ended up having a rushed civil ceremony at the town hall the next day. Only a handful of people attended, and the lavish wedding she'd envisioned was reduced to a legal formality. But I wasn't done yet. After the fiasco, I emailed Greg a detailed account of everything that had happened. The fights, the insults, the manipulation, and most importantly, Julia's real reasons for choosing November 3rd. I laid it all out so he could see exactly what kind of person he'd married. I didn't expect a response, but a part of me hoped Greg would at least see the truth. As for Julia, I knew this wasn't the end. She'd come back swinging, but I was ready. After the disaster that was Julia's non-wedding, things got quiet for a while. Too quiet. I knew my sister wasn't the type to let things go, so I braced myself for whatever was coming next. Sure enough, it didn't take long. Julia wasted no time spinning her version of events. To anyone who would listen, she painted herself as the victim of my vindictiveness. She claimed I was bitter and jealous, that I'd sabotaged her wedding because I couldn't handle seeing her happy. Her story didn't exactly hold water, though. People in our extended family started hearing the real story, how she'd insulted Ethan, chosen the date on purpose, and tried to manipulate me into hosting her wedding at my expense. Some relatives still took her side, but many reached out to me, offering their support. Aunt Maggie, bless her heart, was the loudest advocate I could have asked for. She made sure everyone knew what Julia had said and done, and for once, I was grateful for her knack for gossip. But Julia wasn't done causing chaos. One day, Greg reached out to me. His email was short and polite. He wanted to meet in person to clear the air. I agreed, not knowing what to expect. When we met, Greg looked worn out. He started by apologizing for not replying to my email sooner. Turns out, Julia had seen the email before he did and deleted it. She'd fed him some stories about me being unstable and trying to meddle in their relationship. But something in my email must have stuck with him because he'd gone back to recover it. Once he read it in full, the pieces started falling into place. Greg admitted he'd had doubts about Julia's story from the start. She'd insisted on November 3rd, claiming it was an auspicious date for her, and that numerology supported it. But hearing my side, he realized it was just another one of her manipulations. He didn't say much after that. He just thanked me for my honesty and left. I could see he was trying to process everything, and I didn't push him, but I could tell the cracks in their marriage were already showing. Meanwhile, Julia was spiraling. She showed up at my house one afternoon, banging on the door and screaming loud enough to bring out the neighbors. She accused me of ruining her life and of turning Greg against her. She even called me a homewrecker, which was laughable given the circumstances. I stayed calm, didn't let her inside, and recorded the whole thing. When she realized I wasn't going to engage, she stormed off. I sent the video to Greg. He called me the next day, apologizing for Julia's behavior and assuring me he'd handle it. But Julia didn't stop there. She tried to gatecrash my office, shouting at the receptionist and demanding to see me. Security escorted her out before she could cause too much of a scene. I'd already instructed them to keep her out, so I wasn't surprised. The last straw came when she started spreading rumors in the community. She told anyone who'd listen that I was trying to steal Greg from her. That's right. She accused me, a 56-year-old widow, of seducing her husband. It would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. Greg, to his credit, saw through her nonsense. According to some family gossip, he'd started spending more time away from home. They were fighting constantly, and Julia's attempts to blame me for their problems weren't helping her case. At this point, I wasn't even angry anymore. I just felt sorry for Greg. He seemed like a decent guy who'd gotten caught up in Julia's web. I figured it was only a matter of time before he filed for divorce. As for me, I kept moving forward. The kids at the orphanage had a blast at Dollywood, and it felt good to try something new for them. I realized there were so many ways to honor Ethan's memory without being tied to the lakeside house. Julia might have thought she could break me, but all she did was make me stronger. And while I wouldn't say I'm proud of how things went down, I don't regret a thing. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means cutting out toxic people. Even if they're family. Still, I had a feeling this wasn't the end of the drama. Julia wasn't the type to go quietly, and I knew she'd come up with another way to make trouble. But whatever came next, I was ready. I thought I was ready for whatever Julia threw at me next, but even I wasn't prepared for how low she'd stoop. A few weeks after her failed attempt to crash my office, I got a call from one of our mutual acquaintances, a woman named Linda. Linda is the kind of person who always has her ear to the ground. So when she started with, "You're not going to believe this," I knew it wasn't going to be good. According to Linda, Julia had gone full scorched earth. She'd been telling anyone who'd listen that I'd intentionally ruined her wedding out of jealousy. But that wasn't all. She was now claiming I'd been plotting to sabotage her marriage from the start, and she even insinuated I was trying to seduce Greg. I'll admit, I laughed when Linda told me. Julia accusing me of stealing her husband was so ridiculous it sounded like something out of a bad soap opera. But Linda wasn't calling just to gossip, she was warning me. Apparently, Julia was planning to confront me publicly at an upcoming charity event I was hosting. For a moment, I considered canceling the event just to avoid the drama. But then I realized that's exactly what Julia wanted. To rattle me, to make me second-guess myself. And I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. The day of the event arrived, and I went about my business as usual. It was a small fundraiser at the lakeside house, something I'd organized for a local animal shelter. The guests were mingling, enjoying the refreshments, and bidding on auction items when Julia made her grand entrance. She walked in like she owned the place, wearing a dress that was a little too flashy for the occasion, and a scowl that could curdle milk. People turned to look at her, whispering behind their hands. I kept my cool, smiled, and greeted her like any other guest. "Julia," I said, I didn't know you were coming." "Oh, I'm here," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Wouldn't want to miss your big moment." I knew she was trying to provoke me, but I refused to take the bait. Instead, I excused myself and continued circulating among the guests. It didn't take long for Julia to start causing a scene. She cornered a group of people near the buffet table and started ranting about how I'd ruined her life. She said I was a bitter old widow who couldn't stand to see her happy, and she accused me of turning Greg against her. Most of the guests looked uncomfortable, but a few tried to calm her down. That only seemed to egg her on. Finally, she spotted me across the room and marched over, her voice rising with every step. "Why don't you tell everyone the truth?" she shouted. "Tell them how you destroyed my wedding and my marriage." The room went silent. I took a deep breath, keeping my expression calm. "Julia," I said, "this is neither the time nor the place for this conversation. If you'd like to talk privately, I'm happy to do that." "Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you?" she spat. "So you can twist the story to make yourself look like the victim. Well, I'm not letting you off the hook that easily." She kept going, her voice getting sharper with every word. She called me a manipulative liar, accused me of being jealous of her, and even brought up Ethan, saying I was clinging to a dead man to justify my behavior. That was the moment I decided I'd had enough. I straightened my posture, raised my voice just enough to cut through the tension, and said, "Julia, you're embarrassing yourself. Everyone here knows what really happened. If you want to keep making a fool of yourself, that's your choice, but I won't engage in this nonsense." The guests started murmuring, a few of them nodding in agreement. Julia looked around, realizing the tide was turning against her. For a moment she seemed unsure of herself, but then her face hardened, and she stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. The rest of the event went off without a hitch, and several people came up to me afterward to offer their support. They all agreed that Julia's behavior was out of line and praised me for handling the situation with grace. As for Julia, that seemed to be her breaking point. Over the next few weeks, I heard through the grapevine that Greg had moved out. Their fights had escalated to the point where he couldn't take it anymore. According to one particularly nosy relative, Greg had confronted Julia about her behavior, and when she refused to take any responsibility, he packed his bags and left. I wasn't surprised. Greg seemed like a decent guy, and I doubted he'd put up with Julia's toxicity for long. But Julia wasn't about to let things end quietly. She tried one last stunt, showing up at my house unannounced and demanding I fix her marriage. She blamed me for everything, saying I'd poisoned Greg against her and ruined her life. I didn't even open the door. I just called the police and reported her for trespassing. That was the last time I saw Julia. It's been a few months since then, and my life has finally started to feel peaceful again. I've refocused on my business, my social work, and finding new ways to honor Ethan's memory. Julia is still out there somewhere, but she's no longer a part of my life, and honestly, I'm better off for it. Sometimes, walking away from toxic family members is the only way to protect yourself. And while I wish things could have been different, I have no regrets about standing my ground. The months after Julia's meltdown were quieter than I expected. At first, I kept bracing for another outburst or some elaborate scheme to drag me back into her drama, but it never came. Maybe she finally realized there was no winning this battle. As for Greg, I heard through family gossip that he officially filed for divorce. Apparently, their marriage had unraveled completely after he left. He'd tried to give Julia a chance to explain herself, but every conversation turned into her blaming me or anyone else for her actions. When Greg refused to buy into her narrative, she exploded, accusing him of being manipulated by me. Greg reached out to me one final time, not to apologize, but to thank me. He admitted that my email had been the wake-up call he needed. He told me he'd fallen for Julia because she seemed charming and fun at first, but once they got serious, the cracks started to show. "She's good at hiding who she really is," he said, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I wished him well, though I could tell he was still processing everything. Honestly, I felt sorry for him. He didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of Julia's resentment toward me. With Julia out of my life, I've been focusing on what really matters: my work, my community, and myself. running the wedding venue has brought me so much joy. Seeing happy couples start their new lives together has been a reminder that love, even after loss, can still be celebrated. I've also started changing up how I honor Ethan's memory. This year, instead of the usual feast for the orphanage, I organized a day trip to a local amusement park. The kids were thrilled, and seeing their smiles felt like the best way to honor the man Ethan was, a man who loved bringing joy to others. It's funny how life works. For so long, I thought keeping everything the same, holding on to traditions, preserving the house exactly as Ethan left it, was the only way to honor him. But I've realized that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding new ways to carry him with me, in my heart and in my actions. As for Julia, I've heard bits and pieces about her from distant relatives. She's still spinning stories about me, still trying to shift the blame for her failed marriage and public humiliation. But people aren't buying it anymore. The truth has a way of coming out, and Julia's reputation has taken a serious hit. She's burned so many bridges that even the family members who once defended her have started distancing themselves. It's sad, really, but it's not my problem anymore. Looking back, I can't say I'm proud of how things unfolded. I wish it hadn't come to locking the gates on her wedding day, or exposing her lies to Greg. But I don't regret standing up for myself, for Ethan, and for the life we built together. Family doesn't give anyone the right to treat you with disrespect or cruelty. Julia taught me that the hard way. And while I'll always wish we could have had a better relationship, I've made peace with the fact that some things just aren't meant to be. These days, I've been focusing more on the future. I've started traveling again, visiting places Ethan and I always dreamed of going together. I've even started dating, something I never thought I'd be ready for. It's scary, but it feels right. Ethan will always be a part of me. But I know he wouldn't want me to spend the rest of my life stuck in the past. He'd want me to live fully, to keep building a life that brings me joy. So that's what I'm doing. Julia may still be stuck in her cycle of bitterness, but I've chosen to move on. And for the first time in a long time, I feel free. Life is too short to let toxic people drag you down. Sometimes the best thing you can do, for yourself and for the memory of those you've lost, is to let go, move forward, and live. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Story 2. This tale goes like this. I gave my employer and my girlfriend a taste of retribution after they cheated on me. Hello everyone! Remember to click the subscribe button if you like these stories and would like to help the channel. It enables me to provide you with even more fantastic material like this. Let's begin the video now. The OP begins by stating, I worked at a packing plant about 22 years ago. Stability was all I needed. Even though life wasn't really thrilling, I was still getting over my fiancé cheating on me after we ended our 4-year relationship. I just wanted some diversion to take my mind off things. Nothing serious. I met Lisa at that point. She worked as a receptionist, energetic and just divorced. She was witty, adorable, and the type of person that put a little humor into everything. After work, we began to hang out and occasionally eat lunch together, and eventually it became into more. It was simple, but it wasn't love or anything. And simple sounded wonderful after what I'd been through. For a time, everything was good, but Lisa began making vague references to moving in together. We were watching TV one evening while seated on the couch. You know, it would be easier if you just lived here, she added nonchalantly. Consider the time we would save. I dismissed it with a joke, but I couldn't get rid of the uneasy sensation. Her timing seemed strange, and I wasn't prepared for anything serious. However, I reasoned that perhaps I was overanalyzing it. I wasn't exactly keen to scrutinize a casual connection after all. I was putting in a lot of overtime at the same time in an attempt to save money for a few items. Lisa would sometimes say things like, "You work too hard," but she seemed to be fine with it. "Do you not want to hang out with me?" I dismissed it, assuming she was only attempting to be kind. Then one Monday, one of my crew members said something odd. "Hey, I saw Rick's car over by those apartments on Maple Street this weekend," he commented during our break. "Your girlfriend lives over there, doesn't she?" "Absolutely." For a moment I froze, attempting to maintain my composure. "Yes, she does. What time was this?" "Saturday evening," he stated. "Strange, isn't it? He resides in Millwood, far out." Strange wasn't even close to describing it. My employer, Rick, had no business at Lisa's flat complex because he lived 30 miles away. I didn't want to make hasty judgments, but my instinct told me something wasn't right. Perhaps he was paying a visit to someone else. It may have been a coincidence. But then I recalled Lisa's weekend justification. She had declared her intention to visit the casino. I no longer found that to be acceptable. I made the decision to visit Lisa's flat the next day, after work. I intended to surprise her when I knocked on her door, so I didn't phone in advance. After hesitating, she opened it. I knew immediately that something was off. "Who is it? From behind the door?" she questioned. "It's me." I mentioned that as she opened the door, I noticed Rick standing in the corridor, perhaps trying to blend in. My heart plummeted, but my thoughts immediately went into overdrive as Lisa opened the door and I saw Rick standing there. Like a deer in headlights, he appeared still and utterly at a loss for words. Lisa's normally self-assured smile was absent, and her face looked pallid. They were both clearly aware that they had been apprehended. I inhaled deeply before entering. "Rick," I said, trying not to shout even though I wanted to. "Why are you here?" He rubbed the back of his neck and moved uncomfortably. "I was only there for a visit. Traveling?" With a harsh tone, I repeated. "Lisa informed me she was at the casino this past weekend, so that's fascinating. Who among you would want to clarify what's truly happening?" Lisa stammered as she dived in. "It is not what it appears to be. We were fair." "What exactly?" I interrupted her, lingering. "Lisa, hurry up. Rick, I'm not a fool. To his credit. Or even not having it. Came out and took responsibility. Okay? Okay." "Oh," he said, "we have been going out together. A few weeks have passed. It was tougher than I thought it would be to hear him say it aloud. Even if it seemed improbable, I still harbored the hope that there was another explanation. But there it was. The reality. As simple. After a moment of staring at him, I turned to face Lisa. 2 weeks. And what? You just neglected to add that Lisa began to speak when her eyes began to well up with tears as we were chatting. However, I wasn't in the mood for justifications. "Keep it," I raised my hand and stated. "I have no interest in it." Rick attempted to interrupt. "I didn't intend for this to occur, man. The situation simply became more complex." "Intricate?" With a bitter laugh, I repeated. "My boss is you. The person with integrity should be you, not skulking about this way. Lisa, too." I looked up and down at her while shaking my head. "Instead of engaging in these games, you might have at least had the courage to tell me." "I apologize," Lisa whispered quietly as tears streamed down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to offend you." "Yes, congrats," I said. "You both did a terrific job at that." For a minute the room was silent save for the sound of Lisa sniffling. Then I turned back to Rick. "Let me make one thing clear. This doesn't harm my employment. Got it? I quote, "V worked hard for my position and I'm not about to let your personal drama muck it up." Rick nodded swiftly. "Of course it won't affect anything, I guarantee." "Good. We're going to have a far greater problem if it happens," I stated firmly. Lisa seemed to want to say something else, so I turned back to her. "I had no interest. We quote re-finished. Don't call me," I told her. "Please refrain from texting me. Avoid attempting to explain. In my opinion, this is the end of it." I slammed the door behind me and left without waiting for a response. Even though my brain was spinning and my heart was pounding, I knew I had made the correct decision. To put it mildly, the following few days at work were uncomfortable. Lisa never showed up, and Rick stayed away from me like the plague. It didn't take long for everyone to learn about what had transpired when word got out. It got worse when I noticed that some people were staring at me with sympathy. Lisa returned to work on Monday of the next week. She made a few attempts to approach me, but I always turned her down. "There is nothing for us to discuss," I told her sternly. Even though I could feel her eyes on me whenever we were in the same room, she finally understood and gave up trying. Rick, on the other hand, made every effort to make things more amicable. He cornered me in the break room one day. "Take a look. With an anxious shift," he remarked. I wanted to apologize once again. "I don't want this to make things more difficult for you at work, even though I realize I made a mistake, and I don't expect you to forgive me." I debated whether or not to reprimand him while I looked at him. I ultimately concluded that the effort was not worth it. "Interfere with my hours, please." "We're okay," I said at last. "However, don't count on us being friends." "All right," answered Rick, nodding. "I understand." That was the final meaningful talk we had before he left. After that, we only ever interacted in a professional manner. Although it wasn't perfect, it did the job. I was still trying to take it all in at home. While I felt foolish for not recognizing the warning signals sooner, I was also relieved that it had stopped before things became too severe. I reflected on the encounter for a long time, wondering if I might have handled it better. Ultimately, though, I was aware that I had done the best I could given the situation. I was unaware at the time that this situation was far from being resolved. I was going to witness the consequences of Rick and Lisa's treachery, even if they may have believed they had gotten away with it. I believed that the worst of it was over after the altercation. Rick had committed to maintaining professionalism. I was resolved to move on when Lisa left my life. But drama tends to linger longer than you might anticipate in a workplace like ours. I soon began to see that Rick's reputation was beginning to deteriorate. His abrupt disappearances, inexplicable choices, and allegations that he was breaking the law were all being discussed. I didn't get involved at first. I had no intention of stirring things up. I simply wanted to keep my head down and do my job. Then I was contacted by one of my co-workers, Jenny. She was intelligent, in her early 20s, and had a sense of humor that helped her get through even the toughest of days. Although we had always gotten along well, I was unaware that she had been having a casual relationship with Rick. One afternoon, she pulled up a chair beside me in the break room and stated that, "I've heard about Lisa and you." Already weary of the rumors, I moaned. "How about us?" Jenny's eyebrow went up. "Don't act foolish. Everyone is aware of what took place. Since then, Rick has been acting strangely." I tried to dismiss it with a shrug. "Yes, it is his issue, not mine." She lowered her voice and leaned closer. "I was seeing him too, you know. Nothing major. I feel foolish now, though. Before everything came to light, I was unaware of you and Lisa. I was interested in that." "Hold on. While he was teasing Lisa, you were watching him?" Jenny rolled her eyes and nodded. "Apparently, I suppose I escaped a gunshot. It became stuck. The ridiculousness of it all made me chuckle uncontrollably." "Yes, I would say so." She grinned. "We ought to get out someday, you know." "Really? Give them a topic to discuss." The more I considered it, the more I loved the notion, even if at first I believed she was kidding. Retaliation wasn't the point. Perhaps a bit. It sounded like fun, though. "Okay," I said at last. "Why not?" I started hanging out with Jenny. I was surprised to find that we clicked immediately. She was humorous, intelligent, and not overly serious. It was simply two individuals having fun and making the most of a difficult circumstance. It wasn't a serious relationship. The finest aspect? Seeing Rick writhe. Information about Jenny and I circulated swiftly, and it was obvious that it irritated him. A coworker asked me how my date went one day loud enough for everyone to hear. The greatest deal I've ever made. I smiled as I spoke. Rick, who was passing by at the time, came to a complete halt. He remained silent. He simply turned and left, but the expression on his face was invaluable. Lisa, however, was not so tactful. Every opportunity she had, she scowled at me. She clenched her jaw as if she wanted to speak but was unable. The amount of control I had over her just by disregarding her presence was almost comical. However, during our weekly staff sales, things really got hot. Employees were able to get cheap meat packs every Friday. It was an easy procedure. Pay at the desk of the receptionist. To pick up your order, get a ticket, and bring it to the warehouse. Rick informed me one Friday that he would pay on his way out after taking 5 cartons. I didn't give it much thought until I saw him pass the reception desk without pausing. I phoned the plant accountant and requested him to go at the records since I was so curious. As expected, there was nothing, not even a ticket or money. Word quickly got out, and Rick was the subject of an inquiry. It turns out that he had conveniently neglected to pay for something before. The higher authorities began to dig, and the more they discovered, the worse things became. Rick lost his job in less than a week. One of the most fulfilling moments of my life was seeing him pack up his office and leave for the last time. Karma wasn't finished yet, though. Lisa ended up in trouble a few weeks later. The business decided to conduct a little test after someone reported stolen money from the cash box kept by the receptionist. They waited to see if it would appear in the records after having an employee pay with a $100 bill. It didn't. That was the last straw for Lisa. She was immediately dismissed, likewise to Rick. She didn't say anything. When all was said and done, I felt like I had won in every way. I ended my affair with a cheating woman, had a good time with Jenny, revealed Lisa and Rick to be liars. They were able to maintain my job. After a while, Jenny and I parted ways, but we did it amicably. She made it possible for me to find humor in a difficult circumstance, and I will always be thankful for that. Let's just say that Rick and Lisa's firings weren't the end of their karma. The atmosphere at work was lighter when Rick and Lisa left. With both of them out of the picture, it seemed like the department as a whole had been holding its breath, waiting for the drama to conclude. Finally, everything could calm down. Or so I believed. My manager summoned me to his office shortly after Rick left. "Michael," he said, "your handling of the situation has truly impressed us. Although it hasn't been simple, you have persevered and fulfilled your duties. Uncertain of where he was taking this. I nodded. "You have been elevated to the position of department superintendent." "Oh," he said, "there will be a trial period initially, but if all goes according to plan, you will be hired permanently." I was struck by the words like a truck. It was because it was Rick's previous work, not because I didn't believe I was capable. It was intimidating to consider putting oneself in his position. That role came with a lot of baggage, and I wasn't sure how the other team members would respond. "Thank you." Finally, I said, "I will not disappoint you." Taking Rick's place wasn't simple. I soon saw the extent of the damage he had caused, and the department was in disarray. Maintenance on the equipment was past due, morale was at an all-time low, and scheduling was a complete mess. It was obvious that Rick had been coasting for years, working as little as possible to be paid. I put on my work clothes and started working. I started by taking care of the equipment problems and doing repairs that had been put off for much too long. After that, I worked on the timetables, ensuring that the shifts were balanced and equitable. Although the task was not attractive, it was essential. Initially, there was some opposition from the group. A couple of them complained that I had only been hired because of what had transpired with Rick, and several still viewed me as simply another employee. I chose to ignore the rumors and let my work do the talking. Moment by moment, things began to improve. People began arriving at work in happier spirits. Shifts went more smoothly, and machines operated more efficiently. Gaining the respect of my staff was the nicest part, but it was also very satisfying to watch the department progress. After seeing Lisa skimming money from the cash box, the firm decided to conduct a thorough audit of her records as they continued to investigate her behavior. They discovered something worse than anybody had anticipated. For months, if not longer, Lisa had been keeping money in her pocket. She used careless tactics. She had obviously been doing it for some time, but she wasn't as smart as she likely believed herself to be. Stories about Lisa taking out loans and not repaying them began to surface from co-workers. She also discovered that her reputation outside of work wasn't exactly perfect. One day, Kelly, the new receptionist, called to tell me what she had discovered. "Honestly, it's absurd," she shook her head. "It's very clear that her records are lacking. How no one noticed before is beyond me. Most likely they were too preoccupied with her drama to give it any thought." I answered. Kelly gave a nod. "Now though, they don't miss it. She truly let herself down." I had no sympathy for Lisa. She was now dealing with the repercussions of her decisions. Rick and I met up at the grocery store one day. He appeared to be as unhappy as one could anticipate while pulling a cart full of inexpensive frozen entrees. When he saw me, he paused for a second before approaching. He said clumsily, "Hey, Michael? Rick, I gave you a nod." He remarked, "I heard you got my old job," after a lengthy silence. "Well done." "Thanks," I said in a bland tone. His body moved uneasily. "I realize I made a mistake. I wanted to apologize one more for everything." I debated whether or not to let him off the hook while I looked at him. At last I responded, "Thank you for the apology, but we are not and will never be friends." Rick gave a dejected nod. All right." I didn't feel guilty at all, and he left without saying anything more. Like Lisa, Rick had made his decisions and was now coping with the consequences. My promotion became permanent by the end of my trial term. For the department as a whole, not just for me, it seemed like a new beginning. Despite everything we had gone through, we emerged stronger. I'm pleased of how I handled everything, but in retrospect, I wouldn't say I'm glad any of it occurred. When unexpected circumstances arise in life, all you can do is try to make the most of them. For me, that meant using a workplace catastrophe as a chance to establish my worth. That quote's precisely what I did in the end. I felt like I was back on solid ground when Rick and Lisa were removed from the picture and my promotion was formally confirmed. The department was operating more efficiently than before. I was advancing in my profession with the support of my team. In a long time, for the first time, I felt as though I could put the turmoil behind me and concentrate on the future. However, reality has a humorous way of reminding you that not all stories have a happy ending. Tim, a former coworker who had left the firm soon after Rick was fired, called me one day. "Hey, you have no idea who I met the other day." His tone was almost brimming with laughter as he said, "Who?" Already preparing myself, I asked, "Rick." Tim answered. The man claimed to have been having trouble finding job and he looked rough. It seems that after hearing about what transpired, no one wants to risk him. I couldn't claim to be shocked. Rick's reputation took a hit, and there was discussion in our business. If you stepped over the queue, soon enough, everyone would know about it. Even yet, I had conflicting emotions when I heard it aloud. I felt vindicated in part. Because of what he had done, he deserved the consequences. However, I couldn't help but feel a little sorry for them. After all, he had been my boss. Additionally, I used to respect him. However, that respect was no longer there. As soon as he entered Lisa's flat, he finally made his bed, I remarked. He must now lie in it. Tim chuckled. "There's no dispute. I just wanted to let you know." I didn't learn anything about Lisa until I happened upon a social media post some months later. A story had been told about someone who had worked with a woman who sounded strikingly similar to Lisa. According to the article, she was first kind enough. But it didn't take long for her true nature to emerge. She was always spreading rumors, causing trouble, and of course, robbing the register. I can't say that her termination shocked me. I couldn't contain my laughter. Lisa appeared unable to break free from her negative behaviors, no matter where she went. In a way, it was almost poetic. She was paying the consequence for her deeds, which had now come up with her. I was doing well while Rick and Lisa were having trouble. Although it wasn't simple, my new position as department supervisor was fulfilling. I had the opportunity to enhance operations, create a team that trusted me, and make significant improvements. I received a call from Kelly, the new receptionist, one Friday during our weekly employee sales. "This is something you must see, Michael." She held out a spreadsheet as she spoke. "What is going on?" I leaned over the counter and asked. She gestured to a column of disparities and said, "Look at these numbers. All of these date back to Lisa's stay here. Even if we were aware that she was stealing, it's still shocking to see it presented this way." I shook my head in amazement at the foolishness. For what length of time did she think she would get away with it? Kelly grinned. "They are considered untouchable by some. I suppose she had to learn the hard way." I gave a nod. As a reminder of the department's progress since those hectic times, the data was filed away. Although Lisa had lost everything as a result of her faults, I had the chance to take charge and establish my worth on a more intimate level. After things with Jenny ended, I had begun to regain my feet. I stopped dating in order to take care of myself. After all that had transpired with Lisa, I wasn't in any haste to enter into another relationship. Rather, I chose to spend my leisure time hiking, fishing, and even going on a weekend excursion to the mountains. I felt genuinely at peace for the first time in years, and it served as a reminder of how crucial it is to prioritize oneself. I was thinking back on the previous year one evening as I sat by the lake and watched the sunset. I wouldn't have believed somebody a year ago who told me that I would wind up in this role, earning respect and being truly happy. I was back at work though. Things kept getting better. My boss came over one day to see how Michael was doing. He gave me a shoulder clap as he spoke. "Here, you've done a fantastic job. The department's financial results are at their highest level in years. Continue doing whatever you're doing." That seemed like the last puzzle piece to be heard. The cash and the promotion weren't the only factors. I wanted to show myself that I could overcome the turmoil and emerge stronger as a result. In hindsight, I wouldn't say I'm happy with how things turned out. Although coping with workplace turmoil and being cheated on wasn't easy, I can't deny that these experiences helped to mold me into the person I am today. I may have stayed in that relationship longer than I should have if Lisa hadn't cheated on Rick. I might not have had the opportunity to take up Rick's responsibilities if he hadn't been caught stealing. The finest possibilities can often arise from the worst situations in life, which is an oddity. Years later, I genuinely feel like I'm in a better position. I'm proud of the career I've established. I've learned to recognize warning signs and have surrounded myself with trustworthy individuals. If I could go back in time, what would I do differently? Most likely not. Making the most of what happens to you and letting life unfold are sometimes the best course of action. At the very least, I came away with a fantastic story. Years have passed since everything occurred, and I've had plenty of time to think back on it. Whether you're ready or not, life has a way of going on, and sometimes distance provides the clarity you didn't realize you needed. In retrospect, it's almost comical how much mayhem resulted from such an absurd circumstance. I gave my all to my career and personal development when Rick and Lisa left my life. Although those initial years in my new position as superintendent were difficult, they laid the groundwork for all subsequent years. I eventually advanced to more significant possibilities, assuming executive roles at other businesses and even beginning a side consulting business. The respect I received from my team was among the most surprising outcomes of all of this. I believed at the time that I was simply carrying out my duties, but others who worked beneath me had a different perspective. I quote, "We've been in contact with several of them over the years, and each time we get together, they tell me how much my leadership during that turbulent period meant to them. It's a humble experience that I will always remember." After all of this, I received an unexpected message on social media around 2 years later. Lisa sent it. "Hey, it's been a while," was her opening statement. "I hope all is okay with you." I initially contemplated whether or not to respond. After all this time, what could she possibly have to say? I opened the message since I was so curious. She expressed sorrow for the way she treated me and the way things ended, and she apologized once again for what had transpired. She described how losing her position at the plant had caused her life to fall apart, how finding a new career had been difficult, and how she had been attempting to start again. It wasn't shocking, but it wasn't what I had anticipated either. Lisa had a knack for playing the victim and avoiding accountability. I responded briefly and courteously. I quote, "V moved on. Even though I appreciate the apologies I wrote, I'm hoping you can follow suit." I didn't hear from her again after that. Rick, meanwhile, melted into the background. From time to time, I received reports about him from former colleagues, primarily that he had depleted his funds and was still having trouble finding stable employment. I questioned whether he ever truly realized the consequences of his conduct. To be honest, though, it made no difference. It was enough that he was no longer in my life. For me, life proceeded in the most favorable manner. I met someone who completely transformed my life a few years after I left the factory. She was intelligent, kind, and had a remarkable talent at making me feel alone in the room. Our partnership was based on mutual respect and trust from the start. It wasn't until I discovered it that I realized I was missing it. We've been married for 5 years, and I'm thankful for the journey that brought me to this point every day. Even though it wasn't always simple, I learned something from every setback. If this entire experience has taught me anything, it's that while you have no control over your circumstances, you do have power over how you react to them. Although learning about Rick and Lisa seemed like the end of the world at the time, it was actually the start of a great chapter in my life. I no longer feel animosity or anger when I reflect on the past. I feel like I've found closure. Rick and Lisa functioned as disguised teachers, showing me what I was capable of and what I deserved. Therefore, to everyone who reads this and may be experiencing a similar situation, keep going. Sometimes the largest mess leads to the most unexpected possibilities, and life has a way of taking you by surprise when you least expect it. Let's go on with life. Forward without ever turning around. Story 3. My Golden Child is the title of this tale. My fiancé's retaliation was ideal, despite my brother's attempt to spoil my wedding. Hello everyone! Remember to click the subscribe button if you like these stories and would like to help the channel. It greatly benefits our channel. Let's begin the video now. The OP begins by stating that having Ethan as an elder brother while growing up was like being in someone else's limelight. As early as I can recall, he was the favored child, the one who could do no wrong, and the one who received all the attention and acclaim. He was the center of everything in our household. Ethan was the standout athlete, the straight-A student, and even the president of the student council. My parents appeared to be raving about how wonderful he was at every school function, every report card, and every sporting award. Me? I was only his younger sibling. Except when someone required a contrast to emphasize Ethan's genius, I lived in his shadow, seldom recognized. Birthdays, holidays, and family get-togethers all followed the same routine. While I was just present, Ethan would be the focus of attention. Consider Christmas. It was predicted every year. The greatest presents went to Ethan. Authentic Lego kits, the newest toys that every child desired, or cool devices. He received a Lego Technic kit with elaborate patterns and functional motors one year. Children in our area were envious of the gift. In contrast, I received a fake Lego set without any correct instructions. "Oh, you like to figure things out on your own, don't you?" My parents dismissed it. Yes, mother. Ethan received the premium set for just this reason, whereas I received the one that was missing half of its components. Childhood was not the only time this partiality occurred. My parents celebrated Ethan's 16th birthday as if it were a significant occasion, suitable for a king or queen. They said that a first automobile should be something respectable, so they got him a second-hand BMW. It was still a BMW, even if it was an older model. They gave him the keys as if they had just obtained his ticket to fame, and I will always remember how proud they looked. I didn't anticipate receiving the same treatment when I reached 16, but I also didn't anticipate inheriting my father's old Ford. And Ethan's upgrade to a newer automobile was the sole reason I received it. Before I reached adolescence, I had learned to live with my position in the family hierarchy. I was only an afterthought, but Ethan was destined for greatness. Although my parents didn't express it directly, their behavior made it clear. When Ethan failed an exam, it was because he was too tired from his extracurricular activities. He was always working so hard or under so much pressure that his faults were forgiven. He was stressed out after splitting with his fiancée, which is why he crashed his father's automobile. In contrast, my accomplishments, such as winning a school competition, were minimized. This year's questions must have been simple. At one point, Mom shrugged. Ethan's achievements continued beyond high school. He attended a prestigious business school after graduating, with financial assistance from my parents and Ava's father. It was a private school with all the resources he could possibly require, networking opportunities, and small class sizes. It was referred to by my parents as an investment in his future. Me? On a scholarship, I entered the field of logistics. I didn't ask, and neither did my parents offer to help. By then I was wiser. Ethan, meanwhile, joined upscale clubs and partied at student functions. To make ends meet. I was working evenings unloading trucks. I recall being so tired when I got home that my mother was on the phone boasting about Ethan's amazing ideas and how he was already establishing connections with possible business partners. Nobody inquired about my coursework or how I managed to balance employment and education. They were unaware that I had received a scholarship. Every time the family got together, the pattern persisted. The topic of Ethan kept coming up, regardless of what I was doing. Like a broken record it was. Ethan's academic performance, Ethan's schemes, the bright future of Ethan. It didn't seem to matter even after I began working after graduation and moved up the ranks in my firm. With the help of Ava's father and our parents, Ethan had already launched his first restaurant. They easily ignored the loans and family funds that enabled it, acting as though he had started the entire project from the ground up. Without Ava's dad's distribution contracts, the restaurant wasn't exactly lucrative despite being a contemporary, Instagram-worthy, and dazzling establishment that attracted a lot of attention. It most likely would not have endured for a year. Nevertheless, my parents continued to refer to him as a brilliant businessman. To commemorate the big opening, they even threw him a lavish party, complete with speeches expressing their pride. Naturally, I was not asked to speak at the celebration. I watched from the corner as everyone toasted Ethan's genius. The fact that I had risen from a junior manager to a regional director for a global logistics firm was irrelevant. I was still simply Ethan's younger brother to them, the one who was never good enough. Ethan's marriage to Ava was the tipping point. Ava was from a powerful and affluent family. Her mother was quite active in social circles and charitable activities, while her father had a large distribution network. Their wedding was the buzz of the town and a grandiose, costly event. Ava's parents gave them a home as a wedding present, and they also had a destination ceremony and a Maldivian honeymoon. My folks were talking about it non-stop. As though he had paid for all of it himself, they added, "Look at what Ethan has accomplished." Ethan's life was not one that I envied, not at all. I had learned to set reasonable expectations and concentrate on my own objectives and well-being. However, I became exhausted by the incessant comparisons. Whatever I did, it was never sufficient. I wasn't sufficient. I met Mia at that point. The pivotal moment in my life came when I met Mia. I wasn't really searching for something significant at the moment. I was working. It seemed like the first time I was doing something that truly mattered, and I had just begun moving up the ranks in my firm. However, life has a humorous way of taking you by surprise. Mia and I were working on a collaborative project when we met at a business networking event. I had never met anyone like her. Mia was a lawyer, but not the typical Hollywood lawyer, all about winning, cold, and calculating. She had a keen sense of humor that could disarm anyone, and she was kind and pleasant. I wasn't used to feeling like the most important person in the room, but that feeling started as soon as we spoke. Titles and dramatic tales didn't matter to her. Her inquiries were sincere. She listened to my responses and related personal anecdotes. I have vivid memories of that evening. In the end, we sat in a corner and discussed everything from our jobs to our favorite classic films. I giggled when she said that The Flat was her favorite, because it was also mine. We became friends because we both loved Thai cuisine and 1,000-piece puzzles, even though she acknowledged she never had the patience to complete them. In a way I had never felt before, it was effortless and natural. With Mia, I felt noticed for the first time in my life. I wasn't just the person who worked himself to death, or Ethan's younger sibling. She liked me because I was myself. After exchanging phone numbers that evening, our relationship took off. She suggested a little obscure Thai restaurant where we went on our first date. Although it was simple, it was ideal. We laughed and spoke for hours, and by the end of the evening, I realized she was unique. Mia made no effort to dazzle or amaze me. She was simply herself, and it was sufficient. I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years as our connection developed. Self-assurance. I began to believe in myself because Mia believed in me. She never compared me to anybody, much less Ethan. I wasn't vying for approval or attention. I was sufficient enough already. I proposed a year later. I chose nothing ostentatious, no extravagant displays or surprises worthy of going viral. On a park seat where we had spent so many afternoons together, there was just the two of us. I hardly finished speaking when she stopped me with a loud "yes" as I brought out the ring. Later, we chuckled about it. How she prevented me from even finishing. However, that was Mia. She didn't need to overthink things because she understood what she wanted. My family had a range of emotions when I told them about the engagement. My mother seemed to be only going through the motions, but she seemed content enough. My father hardly acknowledged it. Ethan grinned at me and remarked, "It's about time, little bro," as I muttered something about finally getting settled. I ignored it even though it felt condescending. I thought I did, however. Things began to change during our engagement party. As usual, Ethan and Ava arrived late. Ava was sharing pictures to Instagram as usual. Minutes after entering. She captioned one picture with her flawless grin for the camera, expressing how glad she was to celebrate the birth of my brother-in-law. Ethan, however, appeared preoccupied. After giving me a brief handshake of congratulations, he hung around Mia for the whole of the night. I initially believed I was dreaming. It was normal for Ethan to strike up a discussion with everyone because he was always the light of the party. However, it was more difficult to ignore as the evening wore on. He made an effort to speak with Mia, complimenting her on her attire and inquiring about her job. I even offered to guide her through the legal documents related to our impending nuptials. Being the courteous person that she is, Mia didn't appear to care. She assumed that Ethan was only being amiable. Even though I remained silent that evening, the uneasiness persisted. Ethan's attempt to overshadow me was not the first time. However, it felt different. This had nothing to do with grades, presents, or who had the nicer automobile. It was a personal matter. As the weeks passed, it was more difficult to overlook Ethan's actions. He began to appear at locations where Mia and I would be saying that it was a coincidence. He made a great show of talking to her as she waited for her order when he happened to run into her at a coffee shop close to her workplace. He started sitting in the crowd like a proud fan at occasions when Mia was the guest speaker. At a family meal, Ethan mentioned a new business possibility, which marked a turning point. He remarked nonchalantly, "I'm considering hiring some legal counsel for my restaurants." "You ought to think about putting in a bid for the contract, Mia. Keeping it in the family would be fantastic. It was a great concept, according to my folks. You see, Ethan always has everyone's best interests in mind." Mom smiled as she spoke. After hesitating, Mia decided to investigate. She is really professional, so she wasn't going to reject a possible customer because it was Ethan. Even yet, she sensed that something was wrong. "I have no faith in him. That evening," she informed me. "But for the time being, I'll comply. Let's uncover his true intentions." Ethan quickly made clear what his genuine motivations were. He pretended to be talking about business when he started contacting Mia late at night. It was about the contract at first, inquiries concerning deadlines and legalese. The texts eventually grew more intimate, though I quote, "am too intelligent for you," my brother wrote one night. "Someone more ambitious is what you deserve." Mia showed me everything. She was not the type to keep things to herself. Furthermore, she didn't want our relationship to suffer as a result of Ethan's actions. "I'm not going to let him get away with it," she added, "but he's testing the waters." Mia seemed quiet, but I was angry. She smirked and replied, "Let him dig his own grave. He doesn't know who he's dealing with, but he believes he's playing me." So we waited. I first believed that Ethan's actions would end like many of his impetuous thoughts. However, rather than retreating, he intensified his efforts. His occasional visits around Mia increased, and his late-night work-related texts evolved into something far more intimate. I was angry every time Mia showed me a new blog or message. Ethan was no longer only attempting to discredit me. He was deliberately undermining my relationship and going beyond all boundaries. It began modestly. Ethan started frequenting a coffee shop close to Mia's workplace. It was the one she visited nearly every morning. Even though it was clear he had been waiting for her, he would grin charmingly and remark, "Funny running into you here." Mia first believed it to be innocuous. She would say hello politely, get her coffee, and go. Then he began to linger, asking her about her cases or making jokes about how tough it was to be his restaurant's lawyer. Mia didn't believe it. One night, she informed me, "He's way too interested in my coffee habits. It's not typical." When Ethan started going to events where Mia was speaking, things became more heated. She frequently attended conferences and professional panels as a lawyer. It was not uncommon for her to encounter acquaintances. However, Ethan's presence soon grew consistent. He would take a seat in the front row, nodding as though he were paying attention, and then he would make it a point to speak with her afterwards. At one event, he complimented her, "You're such a natural speaker. You bring shame to the rest of us." I began to feel as though I was losing control when Mia told me about these experiences. Although Ethan had always been competitive, this was a whole new level of intensity. Being the best wasn't the only goal. It has to do with stealing from me. Mia recommended that we wait, but I wanted to approach him. She remarked, "He's digging himself deeper. Let him believe he is in charge." The business proposal followed. At a family supper one evening, Ethan said in passing that he may use Mia's legal practice to manage some of the contracts for his eateries. He grinned as usual and continued, "It makes sense to keep it in the family." Naturally, my folks thought it was a great idea. Mom said, "Look at how considerate your brother is. He is constantly watching out for you." Mia complied, accepting the proposal for review. She is an expert. Furthermore, she would never allow her emotions to get in the way of her work. However, Ethan interpreted her acceptance as a free pass to breach any boundaries. The weekly contract discussions became daily phone conversations. The calls grew more lengthy and continued into the evening. After 10 p.m., he would text her. Remarks such as, "I hope you're not overworking yourself," or "You should take a break," You're worthy. It enraged me. Mia, however, seemed unfazed. Rather, she started recording everything, each and every email, phone, and text. She recorded and took screenshots. He believes he's smart, she added. However, he has no idea who he is interacting with. As time passed, the signals grew increasingly obvious. My brother is too intelligent for you, Ethan wrote one evening. You deserve someone who shares your ambitions because of your abilities. I could show you a life that is quite different. By now, Mia and I were talking about Ethan's shenanigans all the time. She taped every chat and showed me every message. She seemed cool, but I was furious. Allow him to continue, she urged. He is providing for all of our needs. A month before to the wedding, things reached a breaking point. Ethan pretended to be talking about the specifics of the contract when he asked Mia to a late-night meeting. She knew precisely what he was about to do, so she consented. He volunteered to take her home after the meeting. He advised against calling an Uber. Anyway, I'm going that way. Ethan finally let go of all the pretense in the parking lot. Why go through with this wedding sham? He murmured, reaching for Mia's hand. Despite his excellent intentions, my brother is only a middle manager. He's not as good as you. I might be able to help you, Mia. You would live the life you deserve if you were with me. Mia, always one step ahead, had the entire discussion recorded on her phone. She pretended to be curious. How about Ava? She fits your ideal life goals, doesn't she? Ethan let out a loud sigh. Right now, Ava and I are only acting. Our marriage is less important to her than charity activities and Instagram followers. Everything is a performance. But it may be genuine with you. We would be invincible. When Mia informed me about the incident in the parking lot, I wanted to blow up. He's destroying the line, not simply stepping over it, I said. But Mia interrupted. Patience. She smirked as she spoke. We'll take the proper approach to this. We made the decision to keep everything a secret until the wedding. Mia kept playing along, recording every call and storing every message. Completely unaware. Ethan believed he was winning at family gatherings. Under the table, he would sit next Ava, holding her hand and grinning while surreptitiously messaging Mia. Consider how we might seem together. It's not too late to change everything, said one of his texts. I was astounded by the boldness. Ethan wasn't only attempting to ruin our relationship. Ava was being betrayed by him. In the process, his own wife. It was repulsive. And I was eager for him to realize what was about to happen. Mia showed me everything she had gathered a week prior to the wedding. Screenshots of recorded conversations, call records, messages, and even the footage from the parking lot. He believes he can destroy our joy, she replied, her eyes burning with resolve. However, he has no idea who he is interacting with. I nodded, at last letting go of my rage. Let's present the true Ethan to the world. The wedding day began as if it were going to be flawless. I couldn't believe how fortunate I was to be married Mia. She looked amazing in her outfit. All of our family were present and acting as like nothing was wrong. Probably because this was the first time they could boast about me rather than Ethan. My parents were ecstatic. Regarding Ethan, he was acting like the endearing elder brother that he always is, grinning for pictures and shaking hands with the visitors. My parents had raved about how close we appeared to be today, and he had insisted on becoming my best man. I didn't miss the irony. For weeks, Mia and I had been preparing how we would break the news. Putting Ethan in his proper position wasn't the only goal. He wanted to be seen for who he truly was. He had played the golden kid, manipulated people, and gotten away with everything all his life. There would be no way out this time. The ceremony proceeded smoothly. Like the devoted brother he feigned, Ethan stood next to me and gave the rings to me. He continued to display that arrogant smile if anyone saw it. They remained silent. As usual, Ava was busy snapping pictures for Instagram and marking them with hashtags like wedding day goals, perfect family, and hash. I briefly forgot everything else as Mia and I exchanged vows. There was nothing Ethan could do to change the fact that I was marrying the woman I loved. The fascinating part came during the reception. I could see that Ethan was virtually bouncing with enthusiasm as he gave his best man speech, something he had been looking forward to all day. He most likely believed that this was his opportunity to take center stage. He got up, tapped his glass to get attention, and began with the standard platitudes. He started grinning at the audience, saying, "Today is a special day. One day my younger brother will have the joy he so well deserves." The screen behind him sprang to life at that moment. The first screenshot occurred after the visitors first failed to notice. Late at night, Ethan sent Mia a text message. "For my brother, you're too intelligent. Someone more ambitious is what you deserve." The second message appeared, followed by the third, and the room fell silent. They were all worse than the prior one. Next came the footage from the parking lot, which clearly showed Ethan's voice. "Despite his excellent intentions, my brother will always remain a middle manager. For you, I could open doors." The quiet was overwhelming. Ethan stopped. As the visitors gazed at the television, his drink remained up. My parents' expressions were shocked. Dad merely gazed at the floor while Mom covered her mouth with her hands. But the true star of the performance was Ava. Her look changed from bewilderment to disdain as she slowly rose up. With a cold tone, she stated, "So this is why you've been so interested in Mia's law firm. You insisted on their contract for that reason." Ethan stumbled as he attempted to clarify. "It is not what it appears to be." For the first time in his life, his customary charm failed him as he spoke. "Mia, not understood, not understood." Mia's voice was like a knife piercing the room. She confronted Ethan while remaining composed. "Perhaps you could clarify how I was expected to interpret these signals, or the moment in the parking lot when you attempted to take my hand." No one moved, but the visitors began to murmur. Always the epitome of poise, Ava's father got up quietly and left the room. Even without the backing of his father-in-law, everyone understood what it meant. Ethan's eateries would fail. After removing her wedding band, Ava set it on the table before Ethan. "We'll discuss it later," she responded icily. "My attorney will get in touch with you." Desperate for help, Ethan looked around the room, but nobody spoke up for him. My parents were in too much astonishment to comment. Mom muttered, and Dad just gazed at the floor. God, oh God. For the first time in his life, Ethan's charm and justifications failed to save him, she muttered. "Hurry up, we are related." Ethan's voice cracked as he said, "Mia, you do realize that this was simply polite conversation?" Mia didn't even bat an eyelid. Cordial exchange of messages. She raised an eyebrow and repeated, "You've sent me hundreds of texts, Ethan. Should I display the one where you indicated that anything may be changed at any time?" Ava didn't hold out for a response. She smiled tightly as she turned to face the visitors. "I apologize for the scene," she replied steadily. "Please keep having fun. They still have today." After a brief pause, the music resumed and a bottle of champagne was opened by one of the visitors. Meanwhile, Ethan's face was white as he stood still. Everyone saw him for what he truly was for the first time. Silently, he slipped out the side door while the others resumed their drinking and dancing. Seeing the guy who had lived his entire life at the center of attention fade into obscurity was almost pitiful. I couldn't help but feel a weird feeling of relief as Mia and I sat together in the hotel suite that evening. It was over my life, over Ethan's grasp. He had finally stopped his one-upping and relentless manipulation. Mia grinned as she rested her head on my shoulder. "Well," she said, "that, in my opinion, went better than anticipated." The wedding's aftermath was severe and quick, as Mia and I had anticipated. On the morning following the chaotic family group chat, my mother sent a barrage of texts that alternated between justifications and incredulity. She wrote, "This can't be real. There must be a miscommunication." Dad, however, remained silent throughout. Presumably, since there was no way to justify what had transpired, he remained mute. This time, there was no ignoring the fact that Ethan's reputation as a perfect child had been destroyed. Ethan, on the other hand, vanished. For days following the wedding, he was literally unreachable. He didn't answer his phone, he didn't go home, and he most surely didn't show up at the restaurants. My parents informed me that he was staying at a motel while he considered his options when I eventually got a response. Mom stated he's under a lot of stress at the moment, still attempting to protect him. "You must realize that while he is your brother, he committed a mistake." I didn't want to listen to justifications. "Missing someone's birthday is a mistake," I said. Ethan did not make a mistake. It was planned. He was well aware of his actions. When Mom began to cry, Dad finally picked up the phone. "As a family, we just want to get past this," he stated. The done is the done. No, I spoke aggressively. Ethan embarrassed himself while attempting to ruin our relationship. He is to blame for it. I'm not acting like this never happened. Ava, meanwhile, was on the move. She hired one of the top lawyers in the state and filed for divorce within a week. Nor did her father waste any time. His corporation instantly discontinued all contracts with Ethan's eateries. Not with those bargains. There was no opportunity for the eateries. Without the familial ties that Ava provided, Ethan's enterprises would eventually fail, since he had always depended on them to stay afloat. Mia and I made an effort to move on from it all, determining to put our attention on one another rather than the mayhem Ethan had left behind. We set off on our honeymoon. We spent 2 weeks seeing little villages, eating delicious cuisine, and discussing our future plans. Although it was a much-needed getaway, the consequences were too obvious to overlook when we returned. Ethan was different now that he was back in town. The formerly self-assured and endearing elder brother has become a shell of his former self. His reputation was in ruins, and he was having trouble keeping his restaurants open. Some of his previous business associates discreetly distanced themselves from him, and rumors circulated about what had transpired at the wedding. Even my parents, who had always stood up for him, didn't seem to know how to respond. One evening, Mom called me in a tentative tone. "You know, he's having a lot of trouble." "I said," she said, "perhaps you could get in touch. Right now he needs his brother." It nearly made me chuckle. He is in need of his brother. He made every effort to discredit the same brother. He attempted to destroy Mom's side of the family's wedding with the same sibling. He was wrong. He's family, though. That means something to you, doesn't it? Family doesn't only apply when Ethan is in need, I fired back. Mom, he has never given a damn about me. His main concern is himself. That talk came to an end. Ethan's circumstances had not improved after 3 months. To settle bills, he sold one of his eateries, but it wasn't enough. At that point, Ava had become completely engrossed in her father's company and was succeeding as a project manager for one of their largest clients. I couldn't really blame her for not looking back. Ethan had made a mess, and she deserved better. For the first time in my life, I felt like my parents had a different opinion of me. Although it didn't happen all at once, I did notice some little changes. They began to inquire about my work and pay attention when I discussed it. One day, Mom even contacted Mia to get her advice on a legal issue, something she would have previously brought to Ethan without hesitation. It seemed odd, almost unreal. However, I wasn't going to allow myself to get overly at ease. When Ethan finally received his fair desserts, years of being ignored don't simply go away. Ethan's eateries had vanished a year after the wedding. In search of a new beginning, he sold the last one and relocated to a different city. According to rumors, he was attempting to start a new company. But I didn't think it would succeed without Ava's father's ties. Even my parents, who still speak to him periodically, looked worn out by his incessant demand for assistance. They weren't rushing to correct his errors for once. For our part, Mia and I concentrated on creating our life together. After purchasing a home and establishing a routine, we learned that we were expecting a boy, our first child. The drama of the previous year was somewhat overshadowed by the joy of becoming parents. At last, I had the impression that I was emerging from Ethan's shadow and building a life that was all mine. Last word. People frequently inquire as to whether I feel sorry for Ethan's fate. No, is the response. He was deceptive and self-centered, ruining his own life. Mia and I only brought the truth to light. So be it, if that's what it needed for people to realize his true self at last.